right, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I'm just going to wait about 2 or 3 minutes while we have everybody logging in. We do have interpretation tonight, and up on the screen, I'm going to go ahead and post the instructions for logging in and getting set up with interpretation. Again, thank you guys for being here tonight, and we're just going to give everybody 3 or 4 minutes to get themselves logged in. We'll be back with you in momentarily. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to ask that all of our panelists go ahead and put your video on so we can introduce ourselves. My name is Jennifer Larson. I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Education Services here in the Novato Unified School District. I am thrilled to be here with you tonight. Besides being an employee here and a past teacher for many, many years, I've also been a student here at NUSD, and I also am the parent of a 6th grader and an 8th grader currently. So excited to be able to share a little bit more about proficiency-based education, both from my standpoint here as assistant superintendent, but also as a parent who's experiencing it with my students in the moment. And so we're just going to go on down the list, and I'm going to let all of our wonderful panelists who are here tonight to share their experiences and expertise with you have a chance to introduce themselves.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Tammy Heflebower, and I'm an author and a lead training associate for Marzano Research and Marzano Resources. It's been my sincere pleasure to partner with Novato, as well as hundreds of other schools and districts working through proficiency-based education. So I am here tonight also not only as an educator with lots of experiences in it as well, having led it in my own district, but I too am a parent and have experienced it in that manner as well. Great to be with you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Karen Fremantle. I am the coordinator of multi-tiered systems of support here at Novato Unified School District. I also was a teacher in this district for many years. Adding to my hats, I am a parent of students that attend our own district and am a community member. So I am involved in this from every aspect, and I'm happy to be here with you tonight.
Good evening. My name is Angela Chrysler. I apologize. I'm having video issues, so I won't be able to share my video, but I am here. I am currently the Director of Special Education in Novato. When I joined this journey, I was a principal at Rancho Elementary School. And before that, I was a coach and a teacher, wearing lots of different hats. So I'm excited to be here and share the perspective from special education world.
Good evening, welcome. My name is Nick Williams. I teach physics and engineering at San Marin High School. I used to teach some Avid as well, and I'm also the parent to 3 NUSD elementary schoolers. I've got a TKer, a 2nd grader, and a 4th grader. So I teach at the high school and have kids at the elementaries.
Hi, everyone. My name's Jen Becker, and I teach 6th grade science at Sinaloa Middle School. I've been a teacher for 18 years. 12 of those years have been in elementary school, and I also have a 6th grader and an 8th grader at Sinaloa.
Hi, I'm Kristen Davis, and I am a 1st grade teacher here in Novato. I taught for many years at Pleasant Valley, and now I am at Rancho. I am a prior Novato Unified student as well. I grew up in Novato and graduated from San Marin High School. And I have 3 kids in Novato as well. I have a senior at San Marin, I have a sophomore at San Marin, and I have a 6th grader at Sinaloa.
All right, well, thank you so much, panelists. As you can see, we have a very wide breadth of information and experiences here with us tonight. And so we're really excited about not just giving you an overview of proficiency-based education and a really introductory overview, but we also want to address the specific questions that you have posed to us. So before we even get started, I just want to thank those of you who used our thought exchange to actually chime in and give us some topics that were really important to you ask us questions that were really critical for us to answer before we walk out tonight. And so the way we've structured our afternoon or our evening tonight is we're going to look at some of the questions, and if you were one of the people who put those questions in, every single question that was submitted is going to show up at some point throughout this presentation. So it should be your words. We're going to have the questions, and then we'll be doing some information and feedback to answer each one of those questions. Keep in mind that we're going to try and have the questions remain in an order that's relevant to the presentation of the evening. So if you haven't seen yours yet, don't worry. We will certainly get to each of the questions as they're grouped together and kind of connect up with the presentation. So I think the reason we're all here tonight, and the first and most important, is what is PBE? So for those of you who saw the link and knew that we were having a parent webinar tonight about PBE, this was a common question. What is it? So for those of you who have not been a part of our journey yet or haven't heard too much about PBE, it is our acronym for Proficiency-Based Education. I'm going to be getting into all the details, and we're going to hear the experiences from many different perspectives tonight on what it is and how it works. But I wanted to address a few of these questions prior to even diving in. Why is this a priority for the district now? Has something changed? And with a budget crisis and the current pandemic, is now the time to start changing something? So great questions. And what I will say is this actually is not new. And so one of the first things I'm going to share with you tonight is our timeline. We actually started the process of shifting to proficiency-based education loosely in 2015, and then very strategically and much more intentionally in 2018. So this is very much not a new initiative. This is very much not something that has changed. It is something that has grown internally for many, many years now. And the year that all of our teachers, every single one of them, have started to become engaged and implementing. Every one of our teachers has been a part of the journey, but as we've moved towards implementation, each teacher has involved themselves and engaged and started to implement at different timelines. And this is the year when we are all in. So that's why we're here tonight talking to you, because we know that for some of you, this is starting to be new. For a lot of us, it is something that we've been working on for many, many years. In terms of the budget crisis and the current pandemic, I think these are really important pieces. It's certainly a part of our planning. When I share our timeline, you'll notice that we had to shift some of our timeline. When we started planning this in 2018, we certainly did not expect a global pandemic. That had some impact on our timeline and our planning. But one thing has remained very steady, and that is our staff's commitment to this shift. And the reason for that, really, and why it is such a priority, is both equity, but more than anything, it is ensuring that every one of our students and families has a very clear roadmap to how to become successful, so they know what they need to do in order to leave NUSD on a college and career path. So with that, I'm going to jump in to what is PBE. Nick, did you have something to add?
No, I just in terms of thinking about this as a priority, I think one of the reasons this is such a strong priority is how we think about defining education and the big picture goal of education. And as a teacher and as a parent, the way that I think about the value of education is that our goal is to help all of our students become the people that they want to be, and that their families want them to be able to be, and to give them the skills and the tools to be able to do that. And proficiency-based education is a way that we can make really clear and explicit what skills would be really beneficial to students in the future, and then help them build those skills and give them really specific targeted feedback about the areas in which they're doing a really good job with those skills and the areas that they still want to continue to grow. And I think that has been clarified and crystallized through the pandemic, but it's not necessarily a new priority. School has always been for learning, hopefully. And now we're just trying to make sure that we're really targeted and focused in ensuring that every student learns to the absolute best of their ability and becomes the person that they can be.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing. And I think one of the things we learned through the pandemic was in our need to simplify and find ways to target the most important, the work we had actually done in this the development of proficiency-based education actually was very supportive and has helped us move fairly successfully through the content in a unpredictable learning environment. All right. So we're just going to jump right in, and this is a lot of words. And one of the things I will tell you is we're going to share all of these resources with you tonight. So at the end of the night, you'll have the links to this slide deck, a Padlet of all kinds of research and articles and information shared by our wonderful partners at Marzano Research, all of our contact information, and I'm going to introduce you to our PBE website where you can find all the resources that you may want for your own student and their grade level. So this slide really is to highlight the overarching what is PBE, and what that is it's a transparent system of education. I think when we first started this as a teacher-led team, one of the first things that came to light was learning and being successful shouldn't be a mystery. We shouldn't have students in classrooms who aren't quite sure of what it is they need to do in order to pass their class. It shouldn't be different from one room to another. And as a teacher, I'll speak to, I was an English and history teacher, and the way I graded and the assignments I gave and the expectations I had could have been vastly different than a teacher teaching the very same thing right in the hall. For a student to navigate as they go through their different classes through their time here in NUSD, and some of our students switching from school to school, it's really important that we have some consistency so that our students and their families have a good idea of what it is that they need to learn and what they need to show as evidence of proficiency and success. So first and foremost, PBE is that roadmap. It is a roadmap. It is a transparent system for our students to know what they need to be successful. The second I mentioned earlier, which is it's a commitment to equity. We are committed to making sure that every student in NUSD has the resources and tools they need to be successful. One of our greatest challenges is if we don't have consistent expectations and consistent ways of measuring success, it's very hard to intervene in a timely and effective way. So as we move into proficiency-based education, what we would expect to see significantly increased is timely interventions that are very specific to not just math or English or reading, but the actual skill that we need students to master in order to be successful in math, in reading, in English, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to just, if there's anybody here, I'm thinking if I could just throw it over to Tammy. Tammy, is there anything from a larger system global perspective that you could add about what proficiency-based really is at the heart of it?
Well, certainly. And thank you, Jen. And again, welcome everyone. What I would just say is I think you hit some really great descriptors: consistency, coherence. I think those are the two key pieces. I always think back, as a student, I remember there were some classes I could go into. I didn't even open a book. I didn't study for anything, and I could breeze out of there with the A. And there were others that really pushed me because there wasn't consistency in expectations. There also wasn't coherence all the way through. So TK through secondary and on into higher ed. And what proficiency-based education does is it's not new. In fact, a lot of people are thinking, well, this feels new. It might feel differently, but goodness sakes, these types of things started truly over 20 years ago. We've had standards now in our systems across all of our states for over 2 decades. And when we go to standards, what also changed that many of us just didn't realize at the time its impact is the legislation that also came with that. Now, you might remember way back 2005, it was called No Child Left Behind. Everybody remembered that, right? Well, if you think about the premise, that was no longer was our job just to sort and select. Some kids will go to college, some kids won't, some will go into the world of work, some will go into the military, et cetera. Rather, it was all students need to have minimal proficiencies. And let's get clear about what those are. So we have had actual direction, not only in our states, but also to help guide us, not only with the standards that we've had for over 2 decades, but also in legislation. So the Every Student Succeeds Act, that was authorized in 2015, reauthorized in 2017. And that's really what we have to do as a system. And the last thing I would add is that this isn't something that just Novato is doing. I just went into my own counting here of the California schools and districts I've had the privilege of serving and working with. There's over 25 different schools and districts, and I'll just lob out a few of them. Brentwood to Lindsay Unified, to San Diego, to Santa Monica, to Napa Valley, Atascadero, Ross, Sausalito, Archdiocese of Sacramento and of San Diego, the North American Division of Seventh-day Adventists, Monterey. The list goes on. So I want you to understand that this isn't just here at Novato, but I think the way Novato is going about it is one of the best I've ever seen. So that's what I would add to the discussion from not only your state level, but I see it also in the national and the international level, and have led that work as well.
Thank you so much, Tammy. And just for some perspective, Tammy Heflebower has been working with us throughout this journey, and her partner, Jan Hogue, and we've also been working with Shelly Guys. And this has been a team that we've relied on, and really, truly, there are those people that we work with who are supporters, trainers, but our friends from Marzano are really partners. They've worked with us. They've worked directly with our teachers. We have a direct line to just say, we need some thought partnership around this. We need to know what's next. We need to know what's happening in other places in California, to build up our own repertoire of what's going to work and what's not going to work. And if there's anything that I've learned from working with Tammy specifically is, don't just learn from what's worked, but learn from what I've seen not work. And let's not make the same mistakes that other districts have made in the past. And so while it is new to us, it is very much not new to those areas around us, some of which she just named, and all very willing to help us through ours to say, how can we design this to sidestep some of those challenges that other districts have had? And because of that, we very much have had a progressive, forward-moving, and very positive implementation up to this point. So I just want to give some context that Tammy has been with us for many, many years now, and we could not appreciate her partnership. And so this is just a very simple graphic that I've been sharing, and many of you will have seen some of the slides if you've been at any of your PTA meetings. This is just the order in which things happened here in NUSD. You can't have proficiency-based education if you don't have a very strong commitment to what are the standards, what are the key pieces of learning that we are going to say are most essential in each course at each grade level. When we look closer at how we decided on those, you'll know that when you're looking for essential standards, you're really weighing all of the hundreds and hundreds of standards that our teachers are responsible for teaching each year and narrowing it down to what are the ones that are going to have the most impact on long-term success and are going to build on what came before and prepare our students for what's coming next. So when we look at our essential standards, we're not just looking at 1 year, we're looking at TK through 12. How are those going to fit together? Where are they going to strategically pop up throughout their entire career here in NUSD? And how are we going to ensure that they are consistent and coherent from start to finish? One of our greatest benefits as a Novato Unified School District is that word unified. We're one of the few districts in Marin County that really have our students all the way from TK through 12. And so it's so important for us to make sure that the experience that our students start with is built on and is simply making their success greater and greater over time, and that our communication is consistent. So once you have essential standards, we move on to building proficiency scales. And that is basically a fancy word for defining what proficiency looks like. So we've said this standard is really important. So then it's equally important for us to say, so tell me what that means. Define success, define proficiency on that standard. And that's what our proficiency scales do. And I'll show some examples of those and let our teachers talk that in just a moment. After that, we get into the discussion of assessment. And I think this is where a lot of the mindset shift has to shift. You shift in the twice in one sentence. Assessment is anything that shows evidence of learning. One of the quotes that actually Karen Fremantle here has on her whiteboard that I appreciate and look at daily is, we need to assess more and test less, which means an assessment does not have to be a test, does not have to look and feel like a test. It can be a conversation. It can be a piece of classroom work. It could be a presentation, a demonstration, a project. But an assessment, a high quality assessment, must be connected to that standard. And it must give a student an opportunity to show their learning in any number of ways. And then finally, we do have to have a way to report that and give feedback to our students and our families. All right, so with that, I am going to turn quite a bit of this over to Karen Fremantle to talk a little bit about implementation. There's actually two areas where we're going to be talking about implementation tonight, and these questions are really specific to early implementation, kind of where we are now. Later in the presentation, we'll talk about what implementation will look like for everyone in the future. So Karen, you want to go ahead and start on when it'll be implemented, and I'll take us to our timeline.
Great. I'm so glad you asked. One of the things that I have really valued about this process is it has not been quick for our teachers. This has been a process that actually started in 2015. In 2015, we adopted our graduate profile, and that is when we started to really look at the way that our students needed to be prepared to be able to perform and be successful in a new and evolving workforce. And that led to a lot of discussion and a lot of reflection as a district and what we needed out of our students. And then you'll see in 2017, we also adopted our equity imperative, where we committed as a district to do everything that we could to provide equitable access for all of our students in our schools. This led us to 2018. 2018 is when we really started on this PBE journey. And this started with days and days of teachers from different grade levels and different content areas gathering to look at all of the standards that we teach to our students throughout the year, having conversations about what those critical standards were. There was discussion, there was disagreement and more discussion. There was discussion with the grade level above and the grade level below. So this process has all been happening in these past years behind the scenes, building a foundation. In that same year, 2018 was the year that our teacher leadership team was founded. And this was a team of initially 40 teachers, and it has expanded each year from there to work on this process, to get training through Marzano, from Tammy, from Jan, from Shelley, to come together as a team of teachers and evaluate our own practices and what we wanted proficiency-based education to look like in Novato Unified. So the process has been over a multiple years for us as teachers, and is just started to roll out for us in our classrooms in the past few years. In 2019 and 20, we completed some of our proficiency scales and learning maps for our students and started to implement those as teacher leadership team members. So I know that some of you, somebody said, why are we not seeing this, or when will be, there we go, thank you. Why are we not, aren't we using it now? And how come we haven't heard of it? This may be that it's because your teacher is just starting to implement this with their students. We have teachers just like students at different levels of learning this program and implementing this program, and they have been doing a lot of that background work, and you'll start to see that rolled out more and more with your students. Another question you asked is it typical to roll out this program all at once for high schools? I don't know that I would say that there's one typical way to do it. I appreciate that our teachers have begun to roll it out when they are feeling comfortable with it with their students. They're having a lot of discussions with their students. Their students are asking a lot of questions, which is great. It helps us to clarify what we're asking of the students and how we're explaining that to them. And then the question was that the pandemic is our new normal, learning and proficiency is changing. And it's really true. We as teachers are really looking at what it is we're asking of our students and what are the things that are most critical for them to understand, and what are the multitude of ways that they can show us that they understand the information that we are sharing with them every day. And one of the things that we have done with our scales, the purpose of those scales is to give students a clear definition of what proficiency looks like and the steps to take to reach that level of proficiency. Tammy, did you want to add to that?
I was just going to make sure that everyone knew as well that the partnership they had with us at our research lab, in addition to the teachers doing all of this wonderful work, the partnership with us in our research lab, a 2-year, 8-phase process, we looked at all of the large-scale assessment frameworks so that we knew what students were being asked and being expected to know over the course of a number of different years and a number of different kinds of leads assessments. And so we were able to share with our friends here at Novato what we learned from that process as well. So it helped their teachers as they were going through those conversations to really vet and say, ooh, did this also come out in the research as well? So I just wanted to make sure that you saw a convergence there of not only great teacher work, but also combining with the research we were able to help share as well. So thanks for that, Karen.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think more than anything I would say is that this has been a long time in the works and continues to be actively worked on every day. And while you may not be seeing it in the forefront quite yet in your students' classrooms, you can bet that it is coming and that your teachers have been hard at work behind the scenes.
Thank you so much, Karen. So I just wanted to share one other I shouldn't say little, this is a much more detailed version of what we accomplished. And as you will see, some of these have had to change towards the end when the pandemic started. But we're very, very proud that through our work with Marzano, we actually were able to be printed in their most recent book, or one of the more recent books. And if you wanted to read more about it, it's called Leading Standards-Based Learning, an Implementation Guide for Schools and Districts. Tammy, Jan, and Philip were the authors of that book. And in that book was published our timeline, or our implementation plan. And many of the questions that came in were about this specifically. And so I wanted to just share that we do have a much more detailed implementation plan. Not only do we have it here in our district office, I would be happy to share that with the team, and we could certainly put this on our website. But it's also published in one of Marzano's 2021 books that are helping other school districts move through this process who are just getting started. All right. So our next set of questions are specific to consistency. And really, in order for us to talk about consistency, we need to talk about how we get to that consistency. And this is really about building those scales. So first and foremost, once we had those essential standards, and those essential standards, as Tammy mentioned, were very carefully identified by our teachers. We were looking for the standards of each grade level that were going to give our students the highest leverage, that were going to be most connected to the standards that came before and the standards coming after, the ones that they're going to be seen most often in that grade level on high stakes assessments. And so we really want to make sure our students were prepared. Once we had those essentials, the first step is simply building a proficiency scale. The proficiency scale is the standard. So whatever the number 3 on a proficiency scale is the standard. That means once the student has met that 3, they are proficient. Everything that is on a scale needs to not only be taught, but it needs to be assessed. So what our teachers have done is they've identified the essential standards and they've written the scales and they've made a commitment that yes, they will touch on all of the standards we need to, that is our responsibility. But what they've made a commitment to is prioritizing each of these essentials and making sure that every student is taught and assessed. And if a student does not meet proficiency in a certain standard that is an essential, that we will have timely and very targeted intervention to ensure that students aren't continuing to move on through the system with gaps. One of the things we see over and over again is in our current system, or our traditional system of assessment and grading, is the students are taught a standard or a skill, they're assessed on it, and then they move on. And if you were a student who got it, great, you're ready to go. And if you're not, you're going to have to wait until that standard pops up again for you to have another chance to understand it. And unfortunately, a lot of what comes next for students builds on what we were assuming the student already had knowledge of. So when we don't intervene in that moment, that's when we have gaps that build over time and lead to long-term unsuccess for our students. So really the proficiency scale is defining what does proficiency look like. The 3 is the standard. And then you move down and you can see there's the 2. A 2 shows the learning progression. So every one of our students and families and teachers are looking at the same exact tool. The 3 defines what the student needs to learn. The 2 tells them the list of sub-skills or lower level skills that need to be able to be mastered and brought together for a student to be able to be proficient. It's a roadmap. One of the most, I think, one of the beautiful things that our team came up with through their journey in building Proficiency Scale was, how are we going to make a scale that is really for our students? This needs to be a student-led feedback cycle. So how are we going to make sure that we have student-focused scales? And with that, we created also our learning map. So for those of you out there who are listening in elementary grades, and often in our middle school grades, you're not going to see these full scales very often. Your teachers will have them. They may get attached to report cards. They may be posters on a wall where students are checking boxes and working through them. If you're in elementary school, you are likely going to see what we call a learning map. If you were to compare a learning map and a proficiency scale, the 3, or the target, is that standard that is written out in the middle, and every one of those level 2 steps are around the sides. And the students use these tools to self-monitor their own progress. When I walk into classrooms now, there's nothing more exciting, and it's happening more and more, where I see students and they've got their proficiency scale or their learning map at their desk in a folder in their center of their table. And as they're working through something and they get it and they've shown proficiency, they shade in that box. So they always know what they're working on. They always know what their learning goal is. It helps them have good feedback. It also helps them monitor their growth and feel successful. One of the questions that will come up is, what is a 4? So we have a 1 through 4 map. A 3 is proficient. So what the heck is the 4? The 4 is the higher level thinking. A 4 is not doing more of the same. It is not more busy work. It is not answering more level 3 questions. A 4 is, how can I apply this new learning? So I can show that I can do the skill, but how can I connect that to a real life situation? How can I compare or contrast it to maybe another standard or another skill? How can I apply it in a project? And so there are opportunities for students to earn a 4 by showing that they haven't just mastered the standard, they can actually use it, and they can use it in real world situations, or they can compare and contrast it or elaborate on it by applying it. So I'm going to pause there and ask our teacher team from an elementary, middle, and high school perspective to just maybe give some examples or talk through how using the proficiency scales and the learning maps have been beneficial for you or their purpose.
Yeah, I can start as the primary and just, we use these maps, and one that we're using right this moment was just to check in again as we come back after break and think about there are certain ways that we have to monitor our progress to become fluent readers. And so the thing that we're all working on all the time in first grade is becoming a reader. And so one thing that you can do to really build your fluency is to read and reread familiar text. And what does that look like? And so our map about that, it really does. We review the vocabulary about that, we talk about that, and even in first grade we start thinking about how do I communicate what it is I'm learning? Why do I have books in front of me? Why does my teacher make it important that that's something that we do every day? So we really use this in those early grades to help students start understanding the things that are put in front of me and the things that we spend time on. Why is that so? And then having them understand I can communicate to my teacher and my teacher communicates to me about why, the why in this whole process. And then they can use these tools to then tell their parents, this is where I am and this is what I'm doing and this is why.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jen Becker again, Sinaloa middle school teacher. And similar to Kristen, ours don't look the same, but we look at the proficiency scales before we start a unit in my science class. Ours look more like this. And I put them in Google Classroom. And then before we start the unit, this is kind of like our what do you already know? And then what do you want to know? And we go through each part of the scale and we highlight in blue what we're not sure we know yet. And we highlight in yellow what we already know. And then they know exactly what's going to happen in the unit and why we're doing the labs we're doing and the activities that we're working on. And then throughout the unit, we go back into Google Classroom and open up those scales again to see, can we turn any of those blues where we weren't sure if we knew it yet into yellows? That, okay, we got it, we learned it. Now I know exactly why I did that lab. I know exactly why we did that activity as a group. So they're very, very helpful for my students in tracking where they are in the unit that we're learning.
And similarly, at the high school level, teaching physics, we kind of open by, I hand all the students all of the proficiency scales for the year on day one. So along with the syllabus, it's like, here's everything that we're going to be learning this year. And then it gives us the chance to both look at them digitally on Google Classroom, but also look at a physical version of it and say, okay, in this unit, we're hitting proficiency scales 3 and 4 about energy. And it gives, like, we've always done what I think are pretty fun and engaging projects. But now it's like, okay, you're not just building a toy car, you are creating a device to transfer energy from one form to another form. And then as students look at that target and they're like, okay, I think I'm getting there. How do I go higher? How do I get to that level 4? It's like, well, let's take a look. It looks like we need to optimize that device to make it more efficient, put more power out faster, and then also model the energy transfers in each of the intermediate steps. Through graphing or through some form of a model. So it kind of gives students the roadmap of where are we going through the course of the year. And then also within a specific unit, what's the assessment going to look like? If the target, the proficiency target mastery level 3 says design a device 2, the assessment is going to be the device that you design. It would be silly to give like a multiple choice test about, did I design a device? If the standard is more on like, use this equation to be able to solve this type of problem, it's like, guess what the assessment is probably going to look like, guys? You're probably going to have a bunch of questions using that equation. So it gives students kind of like a really clear study guide in terms of what's expected for their understanding. So there's no surprises. They know how to master this really complex, challenging content and have access to it kind of from day one, and then checking in on it regularly using these proficiency scales.
Thank you so much. So Tammy just put in, and this is, you know, she's always helping with throwing in the research to remind us that we are doing what we're doing for a very specific reason and specific to tracking their own progress, which is the intent of having a proficiency scale and a learning map. We know that when students are tracking their own progress, they're not waiting for us, an adult, to tell them how they are progressing, but they're a part of that process. Typically, we see about a 30 percentile gain in their overall achievement. And a lot of that has to do with their ownership, because, and Nick just, when talking about an example, if they're able to monitor where they are and they're able to make decisions about what they need to do next, they're going to be much more, they're going to have a lot more ownership. They're going to know exactly what they need to do, and they're going to be able to monitor and move forward independently and really become independent learners. So just a little research there I wanted to bring your attention to. I'm going to just jump back here and make sure we covered our questions and consistency. And I do want to say, those of you who are watching out there, I can see that we have a hand up, but I don't have a way to interact in a webinar format. At the end of this webinar, I am going to share our email addresses and our contact information, so we'll be able to directly respond to any questions that you may have that weren't submitted through Thought Exchange before us putting this presentation together. And we will certainly share the answers or contact you directly if it is something that is more specific to your own individual or family. So what organization or body determines the educational strategy, such as proficiency-based learning, as being a public school focus? In this case, this was really a teacher-driven decision. In that year, 2017-18, we had groups of staff members going to workshops and learning about how to better prepare students for college and career readiness, but also how to navigate the combining or the addition of the 21st century learning skills that we know our industries and our colleges are relying on us to start integrating. And what came out of this was very much proficiency-based education. I will say that when you're out there doing your own research, you're not going to find a lot on proficiency-based education. That is an internal term that we've used because our teachers really felt that it's not just about standards mastery, it's more than that. And it's not competency, because our students are all competent. We would never want to have anything where we are looking at incompetence. So when you do look at research, when you are reading articles, you are most likely going to find mastery-based education, mastery-based grading, standards-based grading, standards-based education. You'll see proficiency-based grading here and there, but proficiency-based education, PBE, is a Novato-specific term. The other reason is just logistical. We have a lot of acronyms in education, and when we were developing this, we were right in the middle of also training around, project-based learning, which is PBL. So we couldn't have it be proficiency-based learning, because then we would have two PBLs. So that's just a little inside information about why it is called what it is. And we determined this as a teacher and administrative staff based on the research that this is really was going to be a solution that is in the best interest of our students to ensure that they are college and career ready. How is this implemented consistently? And that's really what we just said, is our teachers really work together years and years to make sure that they are committed to the same essential standards. They're using the same tools. They're collaborating to make sure that when one teacher assesses a piece of work at a 3, another teacher would also say it's a 3. So that is something that they work really hard on in their collaboration time. And then how long will it take for teachers to be consistent? I would love to think or believe that there's ever been a time when there's been consistency. We've all been through education. We all know that what happens in one classroom, what happens in the next classroom is often quite different. What I can say is I've seen more consistency between the teachers who are using PBE currently than I have seen in departments where it has not been that. When will everybody be using PBE? This is the first year that everyone has been asked to start implementing, as our teachers referenced. Part of that is, what is your comfort level? If this is the first time you're using it, it's important to be going through that learning process. The teachers we have on the screen are part of our teacher leadership team. We have a teacher leadership team of approximately 6 teachers. I would say that group of teachers plus maybe another 60 to 100 teachers have really been invested in implementing this for the past 2 to 3 years. And so those teachers are further along. We will continue to move through that process, and I think that you're going to see significantly increasing consistency, not just with PBE, but compared to what you have experienced both as a student when you were younger, but what you have experienced in what would be a more traditional academic program. And before I just move on from those questions, is there anybody on the screen, any of our panelists that would like to add to that? All right, seeing none, I guess they are okay with my response. So I'm gonna, oh, Tammy, go ahead.
And I'm so okay, not only with your response, but I just wanted all the parents to know that on that Padlet link that we put in the chat, that's where you can find real examples and stories of this from all over. So it helps you understand that research base. I just wanted to make sure that you knew that. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, I'm gonna move on to, this is a big one. What proficiency-based education is not. My hope here is to really demystify and help better clarify some of the misconceptions that I know are out there in the community. Part of the reason that the group of us is here tonight talking about this is not only because we are incredibly invested and have been a part of this process for many, many years, but it's because we're also able to speak from a staff, a parent, and a community member standpoint. And so we hear a lot of the conversations. We are asked those kinds of questions every day. We're out on a weekend at the park or at a sporting event. One of the most prevalent that I hear is, are we getting rid of grades? That is not the case. Grades are not going anywhere. So if there has been some information that has been shared that you have heard that PBE means grades are going away, I can assure you that that is not the case. There is a lot of research out there. There's a lot of organizations who are moving away from grades, including colleges and universities. We are not in a place to be making that decision at this time. It's a conversation that will continue to come up years and years and years down the line. But at this moment in time, PBE and grades are synonymous. They will continue to happen. How a student earns their grade and what a grade represents, which is the important part, is what PBE is about. Second, PBE is not a grading platform. Our grading platform is ARIES. It has continued to be ARIES. Is ARIES the most flexible for this type of grading? No, and I will tell you that our teachers on the screen here who have been using it to the best of their ability have found amazing ways to make it work for them. But PBE is very little about grading. Grading is the output. What we care about is the journey for the students. What PBE is about the process of learning. It's making sure that our students know what they need to know in order to be successful. It's making sure that at the end of the day, an A has meaning. One of the things that colleges and universities really look for in our bios when we submit those at the end of each year is, how consistent are our grades? So if we have multiple courses that have the exact same title, and the percentages of A's, B's, C's, D's, E's, and F's are vastly different from one class to another or teacher to another, that tells a university that we're not very consistent, that our grades do not tell them a lot. And so one of the things that our colleges and universities really look for is, when a student earns an A in our school, can we define it? Can we tell them exactly what that means? Can we say that, yes, if they have an A, we guarantee they are proficient? And if we can't, that's something we need to work on. And that's what PBE is about, is making sure that when we send our students off with a grade on their transcript, that we can define exactly what that meant for them. And we can say, these are the areas where you're still working. And so it is not a grading platform. It is not about grades. It is very much about the process and having a roadmap to how to earn those grades. A change from percentiles to numbers. When we get into the discussion about how you earn a grade or how you earn a proficiency level, it is very different than what we are used to. from our experiences as students. Now that we are adults and we reflect on that. We lived in a world where you had percentages and those percentages were averaged, and at the end of the average, you got that grade. If you were a student who came in knowing everything and getting A's all the way across the board and you finish with A's, you're going to have an A. If you were a student who came in and it was totally new for you and you've never ever had an opportunity to practice algebraic equations, and so you were getting D's, F's, and then you learned it, and then you got better at it, and by the end of the semester you were earning A's, you might get a C. And so what we really are looking at with proficiency-based education is, why are we penalizing students for not knowing the things we haven't taught them yet? And so this is not just changing it. What once was a 86% is now a 2.4. That is not it. This is looking at each individual evidence of student work and saying, this is 2 work, this is 3 work. If you're seeing grades in your teacher's grade books that are not a multiple of 0.5, so a 0.5, a 1, a 1.5, a 2, a 2.5, a 3, a 3.5, a 4, then we need to work through that, because what we should be seeing are those multiples that you would see on a proficiency scale. And last, and this is an interesting one, I've had the question asked if this is a way for us to limit the number of A's, and that would never be our goal. We want every one of our students to be successful, and there's no limit to the number of successful students we could have. What I will say is that in the classrooms that have already been implementing with Fidelity PBE, and again, it's those teachers who have been really doing this for the last few years, and the rest are moving in that direction, we are actually seeing pretty significant achievement increases. We're seeing higher percentages of A's, and we're seeing higher percentages of success on standardized testing. We use Galileo, we use MDT for high school math, and obviously looking at our CAST scores. The classrooms where we had PBE implemented, we saw less losses over the course of the pandemic because they were focused on those essentials that we knew would come up. So this is actually very counter to what our goal is and what our experience is, which is PBE is a way for us to increase student success and achievement, and in turn increase the number of high grades and percentages that, when I say percentage, GPAs that we are exhibiting. Okay. Here we are. Now we get into everyone's favorite topic. I touched on it a little bit, but grading. Tammy, I'm actually going to ask for you to support some of these questions. And the reason I'm asking Tammy is some of these questions were larger than just NUSD. These were specific to, what about college applications? What about private schools outside of California? And while I certainly have a number of resources that can be shared, research information, Tammy has really experienced it, like she said, not just here in California, but all over the nation and internationally as well. So I just think it would be so important for everyone to hear your perspective. I'll just really quickly start with, how does it work in relation to GPA? And let me see here if I can find this. I'm going to scroll by, sorry. So really on a very, very surface level, while this does not say a whole lot about the journey, but I do know that it's an important question. This is the percentage summative score and grade comparison that has been recommended. So this is what most of our teachers are using. Like anything, it's a work in process, and we will be defining that as we move through it. Something to also note is currently an A is different in every class. If you are in traditional classes, in a lot of classrooms, an A- is a 90%. I have classrooms that I can tell you an A- is an 87%, and I have classrooms where 93 is an A-. So the idea that there was ever consistency in a traditional grade book is vastly inaccurate. Our goal would be that we do have a consistent grading standard so that there is that consistency. But currently, this is the recommended summative score and grade equivalent. And I know that that's just an important visual for some of our families at home to see. With that, I'm going to flip back here to our questions.
Leave that up if you will. Leave that up if you will. Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
one of the things that I wanted to mention here that is a unique is you can absolutely keep percentages. You can absolutely keep letter grades in a PBE system. The key is that you start from the learning over here, which is the scale score. What did they achieve in their learning? What knowledge and skills do they possess? What then percentage and letter grade does that equate to? Versus the other way around, which is traditionally thinking, I got an 82. Okay, so what does that mean? I know I missed a few things here. I did really well on this, but we moved on and we never come back to it. So you can absolutely keep, especially at the secondary level, we recommend that you do, that you can keep percentages and you can keep letter grades. And if that means that you translate those into GPAs, there's nothing that would prohibit you from doing that. If you don't mind, Jen, go ahead now and go back to the other questions. One of the others was, what about colleges and college applications? That's been something that I've been very, very interested in. And I wanted to let you know that I actually placed that on your Padlet link. I'm going to see here if, actually I can't share it at the moment, but if you go onto that link and you look under the case studies, there's actually a case study where they looked at a variety of different colleges. In fact, 75 New England schools and proficiency-based education. This
Tammy,
is, yes.
do you want me to unshare? I know there's a lot of people who'd be very interested in this.
Sure,
So
sure, absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
There we go. So just so everybody can see it, and remember, you can get it from that link that is on that chat, and I'll put it back in there as well. I'll do that right now, just in case you missed it before. But a couple things here. That is, if you look down under here, the case studies, other research, and other parent resources, you're going to find some really profound things. A lot of people like to think, well, colleges won't like this. I always say, have you asked? Because I actually teach adjunct. I've taught adjunct at 4 different universities. PBE is the exact process that I use as a professor. As a parent of students who are, our youngest son is a junior in college, he has this all the time. He has opportunities to go back, rework projects. He's actually got more, he has more professors using this kind than any other type of a typical traditional kind of learning than before. And the other interesting thing about that is that it gives us opportunities for colleges will say this to you. In fact, I asked them, I called all the colleges in that 78% of the students in our district would go to. And I asked them a couple of questions. I asked them if they received a transcript that separated out the academics from the behavior grades, would kids still get into college? And they said their response was absolutely. Not only will they get into college, but we'll place them better because we'll be able to discern whether or not they really don't know the math to get into the engineering program, or whether they have trouble getting out of bed to get to class. In addition to that, I said, so if we use this kind of a transcript, would that affect our students in any way? We have very high performing students, and their answer was, absolutely not. We get transcripts from all over the world. Some have letters, some have numbers, some don't have any at all. Some are portfolios. And if you start to look at some of these, like in these 75 New England schools, and their sign-offs, if you will. So you can actually just double click on that and it'll actually take you right into that college admission piece with links. And it'll actually share with you sign-offs from some schools like MIT, from Harvard, from some of our others, of course, some right there in your own state, that would say, not only is it going to, it's not going to keep any kids from getting into college. In fact, it'll help tell colleges what students know. So with that in mind, I think that's just something really important to be mindful of. Jen, I'm going to let you go ahead if you want and add your screen slides back up so we can see that as we move forward, if that's all right. So let me stop my share there. So a couple things as that's happening. One is you can absolutely keep percentages and letter grades as need be. The impact on college applications, I think you heard that. And I will tell you as a professor, I'm far more interested in what you know than in the span of what traditional discrepancies were in what grades were. In fact, most colleges don't even want to let you know this, but there's actually lists that compare in a traditional setting that an A in this class would have been a B in this district in this class, because we were so inaccurate and unreliable. Really important there. So I think, Jen, do you want to add to that?
I just am going to answer this last final question on this page, which is very specific to what would you do? In this case, the question that this individual asked was, how would a proficiency grade for something like a form on time? And you can't really, you either turn it in or you don't. So how are you going to show proficiency? I think there's two things I want to bring up with this question, and Tammy just really hit on one of them. We have a graduate profile for a reason. When we were asked to integrate and adopt 21st century learning skills, we identified what are the skills for college and career readiness that are necessary for our students to have when they graduate. And this allows us to separate out things like turning in homework from proficiency in an academic subject. Where you see this most articulated right now in Novato is in your elementary report cards. What you're going to start seeing, and what you see in many, and Nick Williams is a great example for any of you who have him as a teacher. What you see in a lot of our secondary grade books is the content, so the standards, and then you have our 6 C's. In this proficiency, this would not be a grade that would impact their proficiency on content. This would be a grade that would impact their conscientious learner. So, for example, a homework assignment. If I'm in a math class and I was assigned a homework assignment last night and I didn't turn it in, right? But in the classwork, I had done the exact same type of work, different assignment, same type of work, and I was clearly proficient. I could show over and over again that I was proficient. The lack of turning in of homework is more feedback around my ability to time manage, my ability to stay on task, my ability to complete tasks. That is very well defined in our conscientious learner standards. It is not a part of our math standards. The fact that the student can do the math means the student gets the grade for the math. Where they're going to be having lower points or lower scores is in the conscientious learner. Karen, I actually, if you could just use the example, if you wouldn't mind, in the class that your daughter had, I thought that was such a clear description of how that looks from a student perspective.
I was sharing this actually with our teacher group earlier today and talking about that my daughter she's in her junior year of high school. So she's really intense, right, about all of her work. And she was struggling in Algebra 2 and was really frustrated to the point of tears. And the other thing that she deals with in her world is ADHD. So details are very challenging for her. And she came home just before, I guess, the holidays, and had studied and worked hard and got her grade back on her test and was devastated by it. And I said, you need to go talk to your teacher, go and advocate for yourself and explain what your thoughts are on this and get some feedback. And so she did. And she came home and a couple of days later, and she said, I feel so much better. And I said, tell me what happened. And she said, I talked to my teacher and she said that she can see that I'm getting the concept. She can see that I understand the concept, but I forget to move the decimal or do the details in the problem. But she said, I feel so much better. I'm not stupid. And that was how she was going into that, feeling like all she saw was a grade and it was not good. And to her, that meant she was stupid. And when she came out of that conversation, her grade on that test wasn't changing. She can go back and retake it later, but for the time being, it wasn't changing. What changed was how she felt about herself, because she realized, like, oh, I'm not stupid. I get it. This is the next piece. This is the challenge for me that I need to work on. So it had a profound impact on how she felt as a learner and her own potential.
On the flip side of that, the reason I love this story is because there's such a good lesson to learn from the student perspective, but also from the teacher. And so earlier on, I mentioned how impactful and how important this shift is for us to be able to intervene in a timely and relevant manner. in that moment, what the teacher found out is that grade that she got on that test was not indicative of her understanding of the concept. What it was indicative of her was her ability to do the details, to work through the problem in the way, the strategy that the teacher was looking for. And so that teacher then was able to intervene and not have her retake and relearn the concepts. The teacher was able to now intervene and just support her in, how do you communicate your thinking in this way? And that is a much more effective way for the student to then move on and actually be successful their next time around. So again, this is just a really significant way for us as educators and our students to understand and pinpoint what's working and what's not working, so that we're not throwing spaghetti at the walls and seeing what sticks, that we have a really clear understanding and data to say, okay, you got this part. We don't need to worry about this part. Here's where you're still working, and here's the strategy and intervention we're going to use to get you there, because we want you over here at this target. All right. So like I said, there's a lot of mind shift around assessment in general and grades. One of the biggest is really getting away from the idea that an assessment has to be a test. Anything that a teacher offers or gives an opportunity to gather information of students' knowledge is an assessment. So we need to start knowing that one of the questions that will come up in just a little bit is, how often can I retake a test? Is the retest only for certain numbers? To really remember that an assessment is anything that a student does. Now, there are going to be tests. There will always continue to be tests, just like there's going to continue to be grades. The difference, though, is PBE really allows students, like Karen just shared in that moment, to express their learning in multiple ways, so that when they come back to that test that maybe didn't work for them, or that project, that presentation, or whatever it is, they've practiced the part of the assessment that they needed to work on. They didn't just have to retake, guessing at what they were doing wrong. Again, this is just another reminder. Assessments don't need to feel like tests. They don't need to be quizzes. It doesn't have to be anxiety ridden. We have a lot of students who struggle, not because they don't know the content, they struggle because of the anxiety that comes along with the learning environment or the testing environment. PBE really emphasizes moving away from having one big high stakes summative test at the end of a unit, and you either get it or you don't. PBE, again, it's the roadmap, it's the journey. We are giving students credit and giving students opportunity all the way along the way to show us their learning. We hope that that translates on the test, and if it doesn't, or the end of the year project, as Nick was sharing, if it doesn't, then we go back over and we say, well, what piece did we miss along the way? Let's fill that in before you have another opportunity to do it. I see Karen popping up, so I'm going to let her add to that.
Jen, the other thing that I would say about this idea of assessment looking a lot of different ways, this in my classroom was one of my favorite ways to differentiate for my students, because especially when I knew that my students were getting the concept, they had the basic standard that we were working for, and I wanted to push their thinking a little bit. I wanted to push my kids who were maybe gifted learners or who were ready for a little bit more of a challenge. And some of the best way to do that for me was in conversation with them, talking about the concept that we were learning. And well, what about if you thought about it this way? Or is there another way you could look at that? And it was where I got some of my most rich information, was in those one-on-one quick interactions as they were working on something at their desk, or as I was moving through the classroom doing something else. Conversely, also with my kids who needed more support, in conversation was where I could just ask questions that helped me to really understand where they were and how I needed to tailor their next step in learning. So my kids didn't know that I was assessing them, but all the time I was testing their boundaries and stretching them and pushing them to help them expand their own thinking.
Thank you for that. All right, we are going to have lots of us jump in on these ones. So definitely all of our teachers, and Tammy, we would love some of your support on this one as well. Let's just start with the first question. Students are supposed to be able to redo assignments and tests to earn higher grades upon mastery. Is there a max number of tests or a maximum score? Who wants to take that one?
I got this one. So I think so much of this is about the context. There are things in my classroom where you can absolutely retake it multiple times. Something like a quiz where it's individual and it's really like, you know, kind of a one-off thing. There are other pieces where it would be really difficult to redo, like a 3-week project that you are working collaboratively with 2 other people. So much of that experience is in the process. And so trying to say like, well, what if I just rework some of it? It's less of like a, you know, how many times can you redo the same project? It depends on the context. Or like when we're doing public exhibition nights and you're presenting your work to a panel of professional engineers. The professional engineers are there once, so that needs to be the one time. So a lot of that is context dependent. Philosophically, yes, we want students to rework their work until it really demonstrates their proficiency and their mastery. And then that'll vary class to class based on context.
All right.
Question number 2.
Yeah, there you go.
Is it true that students can only retake tests or redo assignments if they have less than a 3? If so, why? Again, I think that's probably context related. I'm not exactly sure the specific context of this question. In my classroom, then yes, students can absolutely retake things if they scored a 3 or higher. Many of my students want to keep working on stuff, and they start at a 2 or a 2.5, and then they get it up to a 3, and then they keep working on it until they get it to a 3.5 or a 4. That includes both tests or project work or any of the kind of work products that we're doing. So no, you're not limited just by a 3. With that said, I don't know the specific context of this particular question and if there was like a specific example. So as a general rule, no, students don't have to stop at a 3. Many of my students choose to keep going to a 4, and I encourage them and kind of mandate them to keep going. I don't know, I'll stay away from mandate, but to keep going into a 4, and in other situations that may be slightly different.
Perfect. Thanks,
and
Nick.
Somebody else want to jump in? How should PBE be used for classes like PE?
I will happily jump in on classes like PE. We don't have any specific PE teachers here, although I think some of us have actually taught quite a bit of PE ourselves. Like any other content area, PE has standards. They have content standards, they have Common Core, California state standards, just like every other subject. And so for each one of those standards, they do have a proficiency scale. And actually in the standards, attendance and effort are one of them. So part of it is around improvement and growing, and that requires effort. And so while effort and attendance shouldn't be the only grade, it should not be the defining grading tool. It is one of the 10 to 15 essential standards that the PE department has identified. And just like any other content area, music, drama, world language, science, math, English, you name it, we all have standards that we are required to teach, and they can all be found on our website. And so you can look at those. But PE, actually very much like science, is very much a performance course, drama, music. And those performance courses have standards, and typically the assessments and the practice look different. You're not going to typically see a multiple choice test very often. Most of the assessments that you're going to see are going to be performance-based physical activity. And so there is definitely still a place where they are getting feedback on their effort and their growth in that area. And they can't do the work and they can't show their evidence of proficiency if they're not in attendance. So that is very much just a requirement for our students. But there is a place for that to be recorded, but that's not the bulk of what it is. It's probably 1/12 of what the grade includes. All right. Just on the same note, as we kind of wrap up our questions around assessments, is hopefully what you're hearing throughout this entire night is this trend of never should a student's success or proficiency be hung up on one high stakes assessment or one moment in time. It needs to be the course of their work, and it needs to be valuing their growth. It is outrageous to believe that a student would walk into a third grade classroom and already know their third grade standards. The idea that we would penalize students for not starting off knowing everything and having to work towards proficiency seems counterintuitive to what we do. And that is, we are an organization that values learning and we value growth. And as we move through this process, we want to see students being rewarded for the hard work and the ownership and the progress that they're making, not penalized for not getting it the first time. And we're going to have students who get it the first time. And for those students who get it the first time, they also need a completely different set of supports. They need to be challenged. So if we do have a student who walks into third grade and they know all their standards, they don't need to keep working on those standards over and over again. They've shown their proficiency. It's our responsibility to give them challenge and to push them into the 4 range and make sure that they are, there's just as much room for growth for a student who has started proficient as a student who has never attempted one of these standards before. So again, every student's starting point is going to be different, but every student's potential for growth needs to be open and valued and encouraged, supported. All right, our next set of questions is just about that. It is going to be about our supports for students, both who are on the gifted range of our programming, but also students who may need some extra support through our special education or resource department. So for these, I have Nick Williams. He's going to speak to our highly intelligent or our gifted students and what that could look like in PBE. And then I have Angela Chrysler, who's going to speak to us about what this looks like for our students with disabilities.
Yeah, so I get to work with a lot of really highly intelligent and hardworking students. And I found that proficiency-based education is really, really useful for them because it gives them a target of how they can take that learning further. So often in class, we kind of like, well, you can read this book or you can read another book, I guess, I don't know. And this really gives targets of like, okay, you can do it at this level. Now the next step would be to take it around here to a level 4 by doing more robust data analysis and seeing if you can then apply it into an engineering solution of that force. So that'd be like an example for forces, which is one of our proficiency scales. So as we think about like, how do students process through this? It gives so many opportunities for students to take their learning to a higher level. And what I'm seeing is a lot of my gifted and really strong students are really thriving through this one. The last project we did before the first semester ended was our alternative energy vehicles. And I think 2/3 to 3/4 of my students earned 4s on that one. And at first I went back through and was like, I worry that I'm inflating grades. And I had a co-teacher look at it. And she was like, no, this is really strong work. And I sent it to one of my buddies who works at Waymo, which is the self-driving car company. And he was like, this is really well done, like really strong energy transfers. Turns out I just did my job really well, which is what we're aiming for. So, you know, it gives students a chance to kind of push things forward a little bit and be creative, take the content that we're learning and then think, how do I apply this into the real world? The same way that like, if you're doing energy work generally, highly intelligent, gifted folks can do energy work and make great advances with it and try things in a new creative way. And that's kind of where we're trying to show students the roadmap for how they could go about doing that. As a side note, one of my own biological children has an IEP. And I also find proficiency-based education really helpful for her. Shouts to Ms. Block and Ms. Villaluna, who have been outstanding in making it super clear. Angela, you want to take over on the?
Sure. So anyone who's familiar with the IEP process knows that it starts with assessment. And so this actually enables us to broaden the assessments that we have available to us, in addition to the standardized assessments that our service providers and our assessors are using to look at the child's strengths and weaknesses. Part of what our team right now is in the process of doing is using the proficiency scales and the progressions that the TLT team has developed, and looking at the accommodations and the modifications that align to those essential standards, and then developing the proficiency scales around that. So an example of an accommodation might be a student is working at grade level, but they are only required to answer the odds or the evens of an assignment. A modification might be the student is in 11th grade, but they're still working on their multiplication tables. So they're working on a grade level standard that is below the grade level standards that are currently the expectation for where they're at in the trajectory of their education. So with that, the scales that we saw earlier, what we are now working to develop are 2 additional columns. One that is suggested accommodations, and we know that modifications and accommodations are going to be unique to the child and what their goal is in alignment with the essential standard, and developing suggested accommodations that will help that child achieve each level and give them a roadmap of what they need to be able to do in order to achieve each level and progress through. And then the modification column will show the relatively spiral of the standard and where it falls back into the curriculum map, and allow students to be able to work towards their grade level standards at the level that they're currently at. So Jen, with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
All right, can you hear me? Panel, can somebody give me a thumbs up? My screen went black, and so I don't have those controls left. I think I'm okay.
We can hear
We can hear you.
And is my screen still shared?
Now it is.
Thank you. I had a little funny technology glitch. Thank you so much. All right. So our next questions are about what is implementation going to look like in the future. As I mentioned earlier on, we talked a little bit about our onboarding or our beginning implementation and a timeline. But some questions here are specific about what's it going to look like in the future. And right off the bat, one of the questions is, will there be less busy work? I think all of us as educators on the screen, and I will certainly let Nick Williams and any of our other teachers speak to this one. Yeah, we would hope that the work that is being done in class doesn't feel like busy work. The work that we want to see done in all of our classrooms should be connected to a standard. The students should understand that there's a purpose for what it is that they're doing. And if a student has already shown repeatedly or consistent proficiency in a standard, the work that they should be doing is pushing them and challenging them to move towards a 4 or moving on to the next standard that they have coming. So my goal would be, or my hope would be, that yes, we would not feel like there was a lot of busy work, that everything really was connected. Nick, you want to add to that at all?
No, I'd have probably Jen Becker step in first. And
Perfect.
Well, one of the things that I thought of when I saw this question is, will there be less busy work? Is one of the most helpful things about these proficiency scales is that when I plan with my team, we are so focused about really what we're doing with the students. Does it match up with those standards? And if it doesn't, then there's no point in wasting class time. We only have 52 minutes a day with these kids, less on Wednesdays. And there's no time to waste on busy work. If it doesn't connect to the standards, then we kick it out of the unit. We don't do it.
Perfect. And Kristen, anything from a primary standpoint that you'd like to share about that?
Yes, I think that similarly, I felt it today, the energy working with our staff today, just that idea that we start with the standard and then build our unit from there. And really always thinking about PBE is just that opportunity to meet students where they are. If that's really our focus and that's really our goal and that's always what we're doing, then how can we plan each day to really make sure that that's happening? And that's really the beauty of the work and the power in it, and then helping the students understand what that means as well.
Thank you. And then I think a really important question is just remembering that we are very much focusing on the social emotional wellness of our students. And at the core of all the work we do, if our students aren't well and our students don't have strong relationships and aren't feeling safe and supported at school, we know that learning isn't happening. So while most of what we're talking tonight has been about academic and skill-based proficiency scales, really at the core of that, at the root of that is, are we taking care of our students and are we supporting our families? And a big hope with PBE is increased communication, consistent communication, and a dialogue between staff, students, and families. When we look at it, and it's how we started our year, we launched our school this year with our NUSD family trees. You know, we really love our students, and when we when we bring a student into our classroom, we join your team. We are a part of that student's journey, and we're a part of the family or the family tree that is helping the student get through NUSD. And so we really like the visual of, as our student moves through our programs, they should feel like their team is increasing, that they have more and more connections and relationships to help them find success. So I think that there's a lot of learning. And Nick, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think one of the ways that we're kind of leveraging proficiency-based education to build some of those social emotional skills is by including standards around some of our graduate profile 6Cs. So for example, in my class, we have standards on energy transfer and momentum and forces and all the academic stuff. But then we also assess in conscientious learning and collaborating. And including in collaborating is, how do we show empathy for each other and empathy for ourselves? Like, that's part of the collaborative process. Nobody wants to work with a jerk. And, you know, how do you cooperate and take leadership roles and find that balance? And by students self-evaluating and setting personal goals in that area, it really helps them develop some of those social emotional skills so that they can be more resilient as these events happen. So, you know, I assess in conscientious learning, communication, how they express themselves. Although it's a science class, communication is still wildly important, and collaboration. And all those kind of help students build that social emotional support system for themselves and for each other.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, we do have social emotional curriculum, which is a very skill-based curriculum, starting in our primary grades, moving all the way through. And as Nick said, you'll start to see those more and more embedded in the practice and the conversations that are happening in the classroom. So I want to acknowledge that we are at 8 o'clock. We're going to stay on and make sure that we answer the final questions, but we'll go through them. Please know that this is being recorded. So if you have to log off and you want to watch the last few minutes here at a later time, you certainly can. If you want to stay on, we're happy to have you here. But I'm just going to go through these last few and make sure that we've hit every question. The last thing, we've already talked quite a bit about this, and Nick just brought this up, our graduate profile. They have proficiency scales aligned with them, rubrics to tell us how we define those. And that's where we practice all of those 21st century learning skills. And then here's about training. And as much as I would love, we're going to have Jen Becker and Karen talk a little bit about how the training has gone. I think we've really emphasized this has been a process with our teachers for many, many years, and the training has been very deep and very broad, our teacher leaders especially. But today is a really good example of what a typical PD day looks like for our staff. We were thinking back, and since 2018, I don't believe we've had a single PD day that has not been done in either grade level or content teams, because one thing we know is that our teachers need time to work together when they're building something new. So this is an example of what we did today. We had our partners from Marzano here. We worked on high quality assessments, We worked on unit planning for PBE. We had grade level and content team. You're looking at elementaries. We had a similar schedule for secondary staff. And then they had to choose one of the 3 top rated topics. Communicating with families about PBE, which was a perfect into for those that were going to be tonight, answering questions for those of you who asked your teachers tomorrow. Small group instruction and universal access. In our secondary schools, that translated to what does a PBE classroom look like? How do we see consistency from room to room? And then that last really big question that I know everybody's been struggling with this first semester is, what is a 4? Everybody needs to know what a 4 is. We need to know what examples look like, and every student needs an opportunity to earn it. So this is just kind of a quick overview of what the training has looked like just about every PD day that we've had. We look at those high leverage topics, and we have our teacher leaders leading the path. So Jen, if you wanted to talk a little bit about, in general, professional development around PBE.
So there was a group of us that started a teacher leadership team. Was it 30 teachers that it started as?
40 teachers in 2018.
So since 2018, pretty much all of our professional development days have been around PBE, whether it was a whole district altogether or just back at our sites where teachers like me and teachers like Nick and Kristen would lead their entire staff, or even just come down into grade level teams or content teams. And we have a lot of training with Marzano and partners, other partners. And throughout the entire year, this is pretty much all the work that we do is all around PBE and training our teachers and helping our teachers and supporting them. Karen, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I can add to that. Another thing that we have done is, I guess we could even maybe call it a perk of the pandemic, perhaps. We started doing afternoon professional development sessions for teachers. We call them our on-demand PD. This is an opportunity for teachers to fill out a Google form with a question or a topic that they want to learn more about. And then I set up afternoon sessions. Those are often facilitated by our TLT team members, because we have spent the last 5 years working with Marzano and attending trainings and working together as a team. So I reach out to see who feels strong about that area. And then our teachers gather in a small group and work for an hour together on whatever that topic is that the teachers want to focus on. And for these last couple of years, much of it has been focused around aspects of PBE. So it's been a really powerful opportunity for us to learn together, to learn from each other, and also to build connections from TK to 12th grade. Our teachers are working cross grade levels, cross schools, and it has really strengthened some teacher collaborative relationships, which then in turn strengthens our program for our students. So it's been kind of an exciting time actually for teachers. And just like the learning did not stop for your students during the pandemic, our teachers were forging ahead with their own learning and their own understandings of this program and many of the things that we do in NUSD.
Thank you. All right. So our last couple of questions, will the teacher-student ratio change? The answer is no, Kristen. But Kristen can certainly talk to small group environments and differentiation, because PBE, like any other strategies that we use, require individualization, and that takes time and a lot of expertise on our teachers' part, which they are certainly expert in. Go ahead, Kristen.
Yeah, so I like this question because it does. I think that the thing when you think about ratio and you think about your teacher with your student in the classroom is that I think in a PBE environment, what I always think is I just always go back to meet the students where they are and make sure they know their ladder to success. So with the young learners, I just feel like that's always going to be happening with your teacher with students in front of them. And so that's almost always going to be small group. That is the best way. That's the best workshop model, is what it's often called. Centers, Daily 5, you know what it's called in your child's classroom. but it's that your teacher has your student in front of them. They can see their misconceptions as they're happening. They're keeping record of how they're progressing as it's happening, and they're using that information to plan the next day. And so that is how this system looks different than teacher in front, lesson happening, everybody practice, turn it in. That's how I see that question being described and how it could look differently. So yes, no, it's still going to be one teacher in the room, 20 to 24 students in my grade level, whatever that might be. But this definitely puts in an environment where we're using PBE, your student is with the instructor, your student is more often with the person who's trying to make sure that they move to that next level, meeting them where they are so we can push them to whatever it is they need to do next.
And similar to just walking into rooms and seeing those scales and seeing those learning maps out, one of the most beautiful things is how often I'm now in a room and the student can tell me what it is that they're working on and what their next step is. And so it really is a partnership between the learner and the learning facilitator or the teacher to move forward in that individual path. And then the last question here is how much parental involvement is required? And no more than has ever been before. I would hope that what comes out of this is a much higher level of communication, much clearer feedback. One thing I will certainly say as a parent, I currently, one of my sons, he has 3 teachers who are doing PBE, 3 that are not quite doing it fully yet. And when we come home, the conversations I have with him where he has a scale in front of him are just very, very different. He can tell me exactly what he's working on and what he needs help on. It's not, I failed my math test. It's my teacher says that I still have to work on ratios. That's much easier for me to support at home. That's much easier for me to talk through with him than trying to dive in and figure out where he is in math and what they're learning. So hopefully what we would see is not necessarily any change in parent involvement, but we would hope that our communication with families around the needs of students is a little bit more clear and certainly more consistent across all of our grade levels and all of our schools. All right, with that, we are closing up our evening. I cannot thank everyone enough for being here. Before we left tonight, I really wanted to emphasize some spaces and places you can go to get accurate information. I know there's a lot of information out there, a lot of questions and kind of rumors swirling. We would really encourage you, go to the source. There are some places here that you just have resources. You can dig around on your own time. But I also wanted you to have the contact information for myself and Karen Fremantle. If you've already talked to your teachers, your principal, and you still have some questions, reach out to us. We'll either answer the question or we'll connect you with the TLT person that's representing your school. Every school has multiple TLT people who would be able to answer anything and everything that you might have questions about. They also can support any teacher that might need some support at your school. So we have our PBE website. It's NUSD.com. If you click on there and navigate to your grade level and your content area, you're going to see our essential standards. You're going to see our proficiency scales. You're going to see our learning maps. Again, this is all about transparency. We want you to have every tool in your hands. The next is Tammy's Padlet. That's in your chat. Finally, it's a slide deck. Karen is going to add that to the chat now so that you have access to this slide deck that we just used tonight. And then my email address and Karen's email address, which you can also find on the NUSD website or stop in at the district office. We'd be happy to chat. So with that, I'm closing us off for the night. I really want to thank our panelists. Really, truly cannot appreciate you enough. They've had a long day of professional development. They've been leading sessions all day as well. So thank you for being here and sharing your expertise and your thoughts about where we are and where we're going. Have a good evening.